I'm going to go ahead with the meeting beginning ritual.
起立，面向佛堂，参加三鞠躬、一鞠躬、再鞠躬、三鞠躬，参加各位点传世一鞠躬，开班一鞠躬，请坐下。Please be seated.
Well, hello everyone. It's wonderful to speak with all of you again today. Today my presentation is entitled Perspectives, Day 21 of the Tao of Joy Every Day, and the subtitle I've chosen for today's presentation is Multiple Viewpoints. And to unpack this idea that or this point that I'm going to try to make today, I'm going to use a couple of stories. One of them is from a movie that I first saw my first year of college, I believe. And the second is I guess a classic parable. And I'm hoping that these two stories can help me to make the point that I want to make about perspectives and the Tao approach to obtaining a complete understanding. Okay, so I'm going to jump into it here. Okay, so there was a movie called The Dead Poets Society. It starred Robin Williams and Ethan Hawke, and Robin Williams played a poetry teacher at a boarding school in New England, and it was a rather strict all-boys school. And there was a lot of pressure on the students to sort of conform to authority. And Robin Williams comes on the scene, and his character, which I believe is named John Keating in the story, challenges the kids to take on different points of view, to look at things in a different way. And for those of you who haven't seen the movie, one of the ways he makes the point is at the end of class one day, he stands up on top of a desk and he says, "Why do I stand up here?" And, you know, one of the kids jokes, just to feel taller. And he goes, no, thanks for playing anyway. He says, I stand up here because I want to constantly remind myself to look at things in a different way. And then he goes on to say, you see, the world looks quite different from up here, from this point of view. And so then he invites all the students to come up and stand on top of a desk and take a look at things from a different perspective. And it's a wonderful movie, and there are other points that it makes as well. But that point about being open to changing things up and looking at things from different perspectives is sound advice. It's the kind of advice you would get from a Tao sage, I think. One that encourages you to try to look at things from as many angles and perspectives and points of view that you can. The last thing you want to do is get locked into groupthink or into cognitive dissonance. It's much better to be open-minded and be willing to accept, not necessarily accept, but at least listen to and evaluate a wide number of perspectives, and then use that wide number of perspectives to come up with a comprehensive understanding. And so that was the first reference that I wanted to make about being open to multiple perspectives on life or on anything we encounter in life. Now, the second story is a parable called The Blind Men and the Elephant. And this story, for those of you who haven't heard it, and I believe Derek once brought this up in a presentation years ago, as I recall. But as the story goes, there's a group of blind men, and they hear that a strange animal called an elephant has been brought to their town. But because they were all blind from birth, none of them has ever seen or experienced an elephant before. So they're completely unaware of its shape and its form. They have no idea what an elephant is or what it looks like. And so out of curiosity, they say to each other, we need to go find this thing. And, we have the ability, we have our tactile sensations that are still intact. Why don't we can literally feel it and gain an understanding of this thing called an elephant if we do that. And so they go, they seek out the elephant, and sure enough, they find it, and each of them begins to grope it, so to speak, or to touch it. And, one of them touches the trunk and says, "Oh, this is thick, like a snake." And another one happens to touch the ears and says, this feels like a fan of some sort. And another one touches the body of the elephant and says, "This feels like a giant wall." And another one feels one of the legs and says, "No, this feels like a giant pillar or a tree trunk of some sort." And another blind man touches the tail and says, "This feels like a rope, some kind of long rope." And then finally, the last one touches the tusks, and he says, this is hard and smooth and sharp, like a sword." And so they, in hearing each other's perspectives, each of their limited perspectives, really, they start to argue over, what the real interpretation of what they're taking into their senses is. And they start to, get into a rather fierce argument. They begin to think that they're trying to deceive each other and that they can't possibly be telling the truth. They can't wrap their head around the fact that this creature has all these different elements to it. They can't figure out what it is. And so finally, a sighted man comes on the scene. He hears them arguing, and he asks them, what are you guys arguing about? And so they tell him what they're arguing about. And the sighted man then begins to tell them what he sees from his comprehensive perspective, because unlike them, he's not blind, so he can sort of see the full picture. So he says, well, at the front of this creature, there's a long trunk that is, in fact, thick, like a thick snake. And then it has, floppy ears that are massive, and when the elephant wags them, it literally moves the air like a fan. And he says, and of course, this is a large creature, so its body is massive, like a wall. And it stands on 4 legs, each leg being like a tree trunk or a pillar. And its tail is actually quite like a rope. And its tusks are, in fact, hard, smooth, and sharp, like a sword. And so once he explains to them in total what everything is that they were experiencing through their tactile sensation, they begin to realize that each of them was partially correct and partially wrong at the same time. And that's because they were focusing on their own limited experience of their own touch and not taking into account the other points of view. So, and of course, the point of the story is to teach a lesson, right? And the reason why blind men are selected is because really the story is about metaphorical blindness. right? It's not the story isn't, the point of the story isn't about being blind or being sighted. The point is that when you stick to your own individual perspective and don't take on the points of view of others, or at least listen to them, or pay attention to them, or be open to them, you are in fact metaphorically blind, because you're limiting your perspective. And that's not the Tao. The Tao way, or the way of doing things, is to have a full and complete perspective on the truth of whatever reality you're experiencing. And so that's what this story so beautifully illustrates. And I enjoy this particular story quite a bit. I think it makes the point so well in such a simple and interesting way. So the next thing I want to talk about is barriers to obtaining a complete understanding. And there's three things that I want to touch upon, if I can. And the first one is that the ego, that thing we call I, that thinks it knows it all and wants everyone to focus only on our individual point of view. Now, recognizing what our ego does through greater awareness will help us notice its subtle moves, because the ego is very subtle. It sneaks up on you. And you really have to be mindful and careful when you're trying to overcome your ego. It's a very powerful force within us, and it's subtle and it sneaks up on you. But what I found, and I don't know if this is true for everyone, but it's worked for me, so I'll share it with you, is that when I pay attention and notice that my ego is trying to do things, just by noticing it, it will often cause the ego to recede and take a back seat. And that actually is what you want. Let me say, first and foremost, I am not enlightened. I hope to be one day, but I am not enlightened. So I definitely have an ego, and it goes at me sometimes. And sometimes it goes at me hard and fast. But what I've realized is that when I'm aware and take the time to notice what it's doing and call it out for what it is, sometimes I'll just say to myself, ego. That's my trigger word to let me know that, hey, my ego is up to its old tricks. And just saying that helps it recede and helps me be more open and more open to listening, as opposed to wanting to speak or share my limited point of view while rejecting everyone else's. So the best advice I can give from my personal experience is to pay attention to when the ego is working on you, because it will limit your perspective. It'll try to tell you that your perspective is the only one worth having, and that, as illustrated by the story of the blind man and the elephant, is not true. So the second thing is cognitive dissonance, the failure to be open-minded about other viewpoints, while simultaneously locking solely into our own limited perspective. Remember to stand metaphorically on top of the desk to see all points of view available in any given situation. It's good to have a reminder to remind yourself that there's more than one way to look at things. It's good to take in the opinions and viewpoints of others. It doesn't necessarily mean you have to agree with them, but it's good to listen to them, be open to them, so that you can make the best decision. You can meld all the viewpoints you can hear or encounter and meld them into the most complete understanding by your own lights. Because, the Tao sort of is about our own light. The Tao is what enables us to fulfill our destinies and to take control of our own lives and to make our own decisions about what is good and what isn't. But to do that, it's important to take on as many perspectives as you can. And cognitive dissonance is just locking yourself into one point of view and completely rejecting the other ones on spec. And that's not a good thing. You want to take in all points of view. You want to give them a fair chance. Not to say that if someone has a terrible viewpoint that you shouldn't reject it. If you judge someone's viewpoint to be absolutely awful and have good reasons for that, well, that's, it doesn't mean that being open doesn't mean that, as the saying goes, that you shouldn't be so open-minded that your brain falls out, right? If something doesn't make sense to you, then it's okay to reject it. But the point is, you need to be open to as many perspectives as possible, because I guarantee you there are other perspectives that are not, wrong, that are just different from what you've noticed. Other people notice other things, and that's why it's so good to have a community, the community of the Tao, where, yes, we're all walking the path by our paths are unique in a sense, but it's good to have that community where we all sort of have the idea of the Tao teachings that join us, basically, and allow us to take in all viewpoints and to make the best decision based on the information that we're working with. Okay, so the last thing that can get in the way of taking on full perspectives is failing to hear. In other words, not listening to others with our full and undivided attention. To understand other points of view, it's important to take them in the first place. And it seems like such a simple thing, but believe me, so many people don't listen. I notice it more and more. First, I started to notice that I was doing it, and I still do it from time to time. But I'm aware of it, so I work as hard as I can to try to pay attention to when people are speaking to me and give them my full and undivided attention. I'm not always successful at it because, as I said earlier, I'm definitely not enlightened. I hope to be one day, but I'm not. But I do try my best to listen, and it's a good thing because you can't absorb other people's points of view, which could really teach you something possibly, unless you actually listen to them carefully. So we should pay attention to what others have to offer us. Okay, so I'm going to start to sum it up now. The more we observe and learn about this massive universe that came to us from the Great Tao, we begin to realize that what we know really only reveals how much we do not know. When one thinks about complicated things, like human consciousness, free will, and our wonderment about what happens to us when we die, to name a few, is it reincarnation? Or is it something else? More and more, my perspective is that I think reincarnation is probably spot on. But again, as Bill said earlier this morning, it is a matter of faith. I can't tell you for sure. It's something you have to decide for yourself. And in tackling a complicated issue like that, it's good to take on as many points of view and hear as many perspectives as we can, especially when we all have to be honest about the fact that there are unknowns in the world, and that is definitely a big one. What happens to us when we die? I've heard it argued that mystery of what happens to us when we die is man's biggest fundamental problem. I think there's a lot of wisdom in that point of view. So we have to be honest with ourselves about our limited individual perspectives and the scope of our own ignorance. Only by being honest about our limited scope and our actual ignorance are we ever going to learn anything or be open to new ways of looking at things. To achieve a comprehensive understanding of the true nature of the reality we are all experiencing, it is helpful to be open-minded to the perspectives of other beings. And of course, I didn't write this in here, but the things to avoid are your ego, cognitive dissonance, and not listening to others. Those are the things that can get in the way of hearing those other perspectives that are certainly worth hearing. Now, our individual and limited viewpoints are only partially correct. And the simple fact is that we often lack the other pieces of the puzzle necessary to discover the more complete truth that lies at the heart of the matter. So as I've said, just like the blind men with the experiencing the elephant, in order to get a full understanding, they had to take a little bit of all the information and meld it together to get the complete picture or understanding of what an elephant actually is. And so that's a wonderful metaphor for being open to listening to other perspectives. So we all have blind spots, but if we're open and accepting of the viewpoints that others share with us, it is possible for each of us to gain a more comprehensive understanding by melding those various perspectives into a more complete truth. Okay, so as always, I want to end with a book recommendation, The Tao of Joy Every, a great book to use daily to help one study and learn the Tao teachings and put them into action. Thank you all so much for taking the time to listen to what I had to say this morning. I hope I said something that was of use, and I hope you all have a wonderful Sunday and a wonderful Father's Day as well.
Alex, thank you so much. I think your topic today is very timely because in chapter 6 of the Daodejing, we're talking about the valley as a metaphor. And the characteristics of the valley is that it can contain many different living things. Mapping that to life, it means that we should have the ability to contain many different perspectives and opinions without necessarily needing to agree with every single one of them. In fact, in the teachings of the Tao, the challenge is to be able to accept that there are many different varieties of different opinions out there that are not the same as ours, and yet remain true to the principles that we follow. I found that to be a particular challenge recently, especially this year and last year. There's any number of people that I come across in my life where I am just like taken aback, and I'm like, how can you even believe that? And then I'm on the verge of getting into a political discussion / debate with them. Then I have to stop myself. So I won't spell out what those political views are. People that know me personally know quite well what my views are, but I think that this is a common experience across the political spectrum. The other side that has such diametrically opposing views, how can you possibly believe in that? It's not reasonable. So I find that for me, rather than to be the open and accepting valley, I have this urge to chase people out of the valley. So, and at the end of the day, I have to settle for something like, listen, you guys, you go to the other side of the valley, and I'm going to stay over here, okay? And just don't get near me, please. That's kind of the best I can do. But yeah, it's not easy. And, it's certainly no trivial matter to become a genuine Tao sage. So, and that same challenge is open to all of us. Can you stop the smoke from coming out of your ears when you hear ludicrous political views? Can you stop, your temperature from rising under the collar when there's something that you just cannot agree with?
Let's go ahead and do the meeting ending ritual, everybody. 起立，面向佛堂，持架深鞠躬，一鞠躬，再鞠躬，三鞠躬，持架各位顶传十一鞠躬，斜翻一鞠躬。Well done, everybody. Thank you so much.